G'day world, Chris Hogan coming to you live from Me Media Studio here at Burleigh Heads for episode 109 of Get Fact Up. And I have with me Tegan Borman from Social Law Co. How are you, Tegan?
Good, thank you. How are you?
Excellent. Thanks so much for coming into the studio. We had a chat a little while ago out and about on the Gold Coast, and it was quite interesting. And we were talking about influencer marketing and I guess the contractual arrangements that maybe they're not doing, or some of the pitfalls that are happening in influencer marketing at the moment.
Trips and traps, yep.
Yeah. So we did touch on, some of the things that they need to say around, this is sponsored content. Mm-hmm. Can we just reiterate that again for the audience?
Yeah, so basically it needs to be apparent and clearly distinguishable as being sponsored content when they're posting it. So that may be that, they do the hashtag ad or hashtag sponsored or some other way to actually endorse the fact that it's a commercial arrangement and the reason why they're actually posting it. But yeah, it doesn't necessarily have to be that every time. In my opinion, risk-wise, you would be better off to do it because then it's obviously absolutely clear that it's an ad and everyone seems to know that, if you use hashtag ad, it's very clear that it's a paid endorsement. So you are better off to do that. However, it's not in every case necessary.
Great. So that's a great DIY thing that influencer marketers should be doing right now. Off you go.
And a lot of them are doing it more and more. I'm seeing, the big brands that have started off not so great in terms of their disclosure, I'm seeing changes and they're starting to implement some more of the, the DIY stuff. So that's fantastic to see.
Great. So what are some of the pitfalls that are happening beyond,
disclosure?
I guess, yeah. And why do they need to engage a lawyer?
I guess without a commercial agreement, you don't really know what the terms are between you, and you're leaving it open to a court to determine what the intention of the parties were when they actually entered into that arrangement. So by having an agreement, you can actually turn your mind to the facts and what you want from the content you're creating and what's expected of the influencer. And for the influencer in return, what's expected of them and how that content's going to be used. So you really are taking it out of the realm of, we think that we can use it like this and let's just grab it and run with it, to a more commercial approach. And this is becoming a business now for people. So they need to be clearer on what they're paying for and what they can do with it. And by having a commercial agreement in place, it takes them a long way to actually be able to say, this is what I paid for and this is what I should be able to do.
So for example, we might be taking a photo of somebody showing a product, and that it's meant just for Instagram alone.
Correct.
And maybe their brand goes, oh no, we want to use it on all of our packaging or a billboard or something along those lines. And that's not what the influencer signed up for.
Well, that's right, because an influencer might have a different fee that they would charge for that. And they might have a package of services that they offer, and it might just be for a one-off post that it's a small fee. However, if you want to use that content and create a huge big campaign around it, then that's an extra fee. They could be earning extra money for that. And that may not be what they've considered to be, what they were doing for that fee. So, yeah.
I'd say influencers starting out as influencers might be like open slather. Yep, happy to be anywhere because that helps
more exposure.
raise their profile, right? So where are we seeing, I guess, these contracts coming in? Is there is it based on followers? Is it like years?
It's a tipping point. It's a risk consideration that needs to be thought through by both the brands that are engaging the influencers and the influencers themselves. So the real legal risk in terms of failing to disclose and whatnot comes from the ACCC's ability to be able to enforce the Australian consumer law. So under that, you need to make sure that you're disclosing things properly, and as part of that, the ACCC have put out guidance and said that they're more likely to investigate things where there's widespread detriment or risk of detriment, and that these are blatant disregard for the legislation, and particularly if you keep coming to their attention, it's going to be an issue for you. So,
sure.
It needs to be a risk assessment that the brands and the influencers are making at the time of, thinking through their campaign as to whether or not we need to go and get an agreement, or, is it sufficient for us just to sort of make sure that we're agreeing our terms, or is it just let's just grab it and run with it because we think the risk is low here. But the thoughts around disclosure should always be there from the start.
Great. And so what are some of the other pitfalls that are happening before, during, after I guess, influence engagement?
I guess for fees, so there was an example recently in Victoria where it actually went through the courts whether or not she was entitled to a certain fee. So it was an ongoing sort of arrangement, and posts were sort of added at her discretion, but there was no influencer agreement in place. And at a later date, she decided to archive a lot of those posts and then go and collect her fee. And, rightly so, the brand said, well, where's the posts? I can't even see them. I haven't got the value that I thought I was getting by this being on your Instagram page. That's an example of a consideration. If she had an agreement to say, these are the posts, I'm entitled to archive them after this date, you'll pay this fee for individual posts. And in that specific situation as well, they had agreed to revise the fee halfway through it, which overly complicated it as well. Whereas that should have been in writing from X date, these posts onwards are, subject to the higher fee, and this is what we expect from it. So it really takes out the uncertainty and the risk of a dispute arising by having those agreed terms and setting out what you're doing for the fee that you're getting.
Sure. So are people charging fees based on maybe just a post to their wall or news feed, for argument's sake, then a story, and then maybe getting extra for if that particular piece of content gets a certain amount of engagement, and then are they also discussing the fact that, well, that was all organic. We want to put a boost budget behind that now. Can we discuss that and clarify what that is and what that means in terms of dollars and cents, and is that sort of stuff happening too?
How they charge and what they charge for is so dependent on the influencer.
Sure.
So I guess they charge what they can get, right? So the more followers they've got, the better the brand alignment is going to depend on what they're going to charge. So they're each free to charge whatever fee they like. Yep. What becomes standard market practice, they might have a one post fee, they might have a campaign fee, a brand ambassador fee. It can be any number of structuring in terms of how they charge it. But yeah, if it's the intention to actually sort of expand that campaign beyond the initial thing, there should be some sort of mechanism in the agreement to sort of determine what fees, if any, are adjusted in that situation, and what further input the influencer might have.
Great. So are brands getting themselves in trouble more than the influencers? Like, for example, are brands we'll just use that image on our packaging or on a billboard or something like that? Are they being a little bit sneaky and pushy here, or?
You've probably seen in the news recently, there's been complaints about various different teeth straightening companies, for example. So it is ultimately going to probably fall back more onto the brand, because like all traditional forms of advertising, it's where the brand is placing their product, and there's an obligation to make sure that, they're following the self-regulated guidelines in that process to make sure that, they're complying with all the codes, etc. And in this case, your clearly distinguishable provisions now inserted into the code of ethics. So yeah, it is going to fall mostly back onto the brand. That's not to say that the influencer doesn't have their own exposure and risk in the situation, because, they're a party to it, and also the agency is connecting them. So that's also, they can be an accessory to this, and it's a whole other landscape for them.
Yeah, radio agencies. I know a couple.
Yeah.
And I was going to ask about the I don't know what it was actually.
Lost your train of thought.
Yeah, I did. Sorry, it's a really great conversation. And unfair contract law. So
Yes.
Does that sort of come in too, where the brand might be going, hey, we want you to do all of this for this?
It's always a consideration whether or not, those provisions are, enforceable. Absolutely. But it's a commercial deal. So if they've agreed to, provide the services on that basis, then that's the commercial arrangement that they made. So
suck it up, princess, kind of thing. If you if you sign the contract,
you should be getting legal advice when you contract to start with. But yeah, there's always, mechanisms to protect in certain situations. So yeah.
Okay. Well, where's it go from here? Is there more pitfalls that are happening that?
I think there's going to be a little bit of an onslaught of more awareness around,
Gotcha.
content rights and usage and, who owns what piece of content and what can be done with it. Specifically because we're about to see a new code come in relation to influencer marketing that's going to make this more apparent to everyone involved. So, influencers who might not have otherwise been aware that how their content can be used, or that it can't specifically just be used and, the brand runs with it and then owns the content. Once that awareness comes in, there's probably going to be more disputes that arise, I'm expecting. But on top of that, it's probably going to be clearer that they need to have an agreement. So I'm expecting this is going to be a bit of a game changer in terms of regulation, in terms of growing the industry up a little bit, and in terms of, turning it more into a transparent business transaction and needing the contract that goes with that.
Sure. Where does copyright come in? Because a lot of people would say, hey, if it's on social media, it's free from copyright, so I can use it anywhere I like.
Not correct.
Right.
So, there's always the ability to share content, and the platforms create the mechanism for that. So if you're on Facebook and, you share a piece of content, that's different than saving that content and then posting it to Instagram, for example. That's different, and especially if you're passing it off as your own work at that stage.
So you're citing the resource.
That's right. You are citing it because you're actually sharing the piece of content that the owner, hopefully the owner of that content, has posted. If you're sharing it, and when you share it, you can see that person has posted it, and you're just commenting on, what a great piece of content it is, or that it's useful, or that it might be something that your connections might find interesting. It's very clear that that's, they're actually citing that that's not their content. When you actually copy that content and, go and use it to create your logo or whatever, then that's a problem. So,
what if a influencer is shooting some content for a particular brand, and the brand is in shot, and there happens to be another brand like in the background, or emblem on the shirt, or something like that doesn't want to be associated with that brand?
Can be a problem. But I mean, they're in a photo, and it's difficult because they've created, the owner of the copyright is the person who brings that piece of content to existence. So that might be the photographer's taken the photo, they're in the rights in that photo. If you've got an issue with being in that photo, I mean, these guys could have a problem with this. Like it's.
They don't. Live and Rock. Live and Rock. If you haven't heard of them, livin.org, mental health charity. Yeah.
So yeah, I don't think there's much behind that in terms of issues. I mean, there are businesses, and we have a client, for example, that is in the business of creating content that uses multiple brands. So it's a situation where she will have 5 brands approach her and they're related products, and that they, work well. They will cross-promote each other, and she'll take images, and those images are then shared by each of those brands, which increases, cross-pollinates their audience and increases their following.
So we love collaboration.
That's right. So it's all about collaboration. And then, having the agreements, we did all the agreements for her that underpinned all that to make sure that she could do that, and that, all the parties were on board with that.
That's a very good example of when you need a contract.
That's right. Yeah.
Really, really important.
Yeah.
Excellent advice, Tegan. So how do people stay across what Social Law Co are up to? Where's the socials, and what's the web address, etc.?
So we've got a business profile page on LinkedIn, all of the socials, so TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, all the usual ones. So it's actually a division of Boorman Lawyers. So when we spoke last time, I mentioned Boorman Lawyers. This is a specific sub-brand for that firm that caters specifically to this market. So we made the decision that it really needed its own branding around it, and it's got a very specific audience. So that's the rationale behind the change of the names in that scenario.
Cool. So we have no contract with Tegan to produce this content, but Tegan has voluntarily sat herself down and spoken on camera for Me Media and for you. So thanks very much for your time, Tegan.
That's
I really do appreciate it.
No problem.
And we're going to share this out across the socials, so keep sharing, guys. We've got plenty more coming to you from Me Media Studio. In fact, we're ramping it up again. We've been a little bit quiet if you've hit our website, but no, there's actually some excitement in the air. So
Good
as
stuff.
It heats up for summer. Woohoo! Cheers.
Thanks.